Okay, good afternoon. It's been quite a day to follow up so far, so we'll see how this goes. So my object, and I'm going to continue to call it my object, is this: a surprisingly small and intricate pair of printing plates. They are from the Galton collection here at UCL, and they're test plates for the first weather map that appeared in the Times on April the 1st, 1875. Those are the facts with which I started this project last September. Now, we're all very familiar these days with the imagery and frailties and concepts of weather forecasting, but these images are, or rather these printing plates are the beginning of that imagery, and the culmination of more than 15 years thought and experiment by Francis Galton. I'm not going to really talk about Galton and what we normally think of Galton as representing, because Kate's already done that. Where's Kate? There's Kate. But what I want to think about today is how he went about making a phenomena as ephemeral and immaterial as weather, both visual and material, in order to print maps in a newspaper. His role essentially in the visual communication of science. So for me, two themes have come out of the 100-hour sessions that we've had this year. Firstly, which is something that everyone has said essentially, is how we've constantly been asking different questions of the objects. We've been trying to look differently, and as I've been working on this, I found this picture, which I sort of took by accident, really helpful in that it's turned the plate on its side. You can see it much more materially, and it's also in my gloved hand, so it gives you a sense of the scale. They're about this sort of size. But as I've worked on Galton and the history of the weather plates, what I've increasingly realised is that he was asking precisely the same questions in producing them as I've been asking in trying to get back to that process. Questions of linguistic description, of visual analysis, and of material production. And the material production is crucial, I think, both in terms of what I'm going to say and what has been coming out in the discussion sessions. Secondly, 100 Hours has made me increasingly aware of the importance of personality and performance in how we've been approaching and analysing our objects. And it would seem intimacy, but I would like to think that I've become more friends with my objects than intimate with them. And I have to admit that when Subhadra brought them into the room, I did say hi guys to them earlier today. So I don't know what that means about how I'm related to them. But the wonderful thing about Galton for the researcher is the extent to which he records and discusses his thought processes and experiments in what he's doing. So, in a bid to highlight my two themes, I'm going to try and allow him to speak for himself, and for the rest of my talk become both myself and Francis Galton, if that's possible, and use almost entirely just his words, images and objects to make my argument. So, if we start in 1908 with his memories of my life. In 1875, the present daily weather charts of the Times, from data supplied by the Meteorological Office, began to appear. And I took considerable part in their early construction. I'd made many previous attempts to represent the distribution of the weather in a form suitable for printing. With the aid of Mr. W. Spottiswoode, my friend, I had types cut for me of appropriate forms, and casts from them were used in the set of my published charts in Meteorographica. And here he was talking about his 1863 publication, Meteorographica, or Methods of Mapping the Weather, illustrated by upwards of 600 printed and lithographed diagrams referring to the weather of a large part of Europe during the month of December 1861. And in this, Galton wrote a long introduction on his methods and concerns in representing the weather. The accompanying charts and maps are contributions to a branch of meteorology which is theoretically divisible into two separate portions, though they may be more or less united in practice, and it is convenient to class them under a single term, meteorography. He explained that when lists of observations are printed in line and column, they are in too crude a state for employment in weather investigations. After their contents have been sorted into charts, it becomes possible to comprehend them, but it requires meteorographic maps to make their meaning apparent at a glance. The necessity and character of this double process may be illustrated by the well-known methods employed in geography. If lists of latitudes, longitudes, altitudes, angles, and itineraries are laid before a mapmaker, he is able to elaborate the shapes of mountain ranges, the courses of rivers, and the irregularities of coasts. His labour is critical and artistic. He has to weigh conflicting observations to make the best of omissions and obvious irregularities, and finally, after deducing his results, to delineate them in a map in order to give permanence to his ideas and to make them intelligible to others. So it's communicating visually and making it permanent that are his concerns. Feeling confident that no representation of what might be done would influence meteorologists so strongly as a practical proof that it could be done, I determined to make a trial myself. This is still Galton, not me. And he didn't do this by halves. My 93 printed charts, this is only one of them unfortunately, contain a selection from my materials, printed in their proper geographical positions. So you've got a map. I have represented pictorially 2 of the weather data which admit of being accurately expressed by symbols, which have the advantage of telling their tale directly to the eye. So this is wind and cloud cover. But with barometric data, we have upwards of 250 possible variations to register. As these are far too numerous to be attempted by depths of shading or differences of colour, we have no other option than to make use of numerals. So this is a barometer and thermometer. After many experiments, I adopted the present system and had types cut on purpose. So each one of these is a different type that he had made specially with the different wind, cloud, barometer and thermometer readings for every single part of the map. So that's the charts. We will now leave the subject of charts of mere record and consider the method of employing their results. It takes a vast number of coordinates to determine the course of any irregular line, and a still greater number of pieces of mosaic or stitches of tapestry to express a very simple picture. So, conversely, a few judicious sweeps and shadings of a draftsman's pen may embody the simultaneous observations of hundreds of meteorologists. So this is where he turns to lithography rather than types. He explained, the movements of the wind are on the plane of the earth and can therefore be described by directive marks on the plane of our paper. But the other meteorological elements are of a different character and introduce a third dimension. They require a similar pictorial treatment to that employed for geographical elevations. Areas of elevation and depression of the barometer, etc., must be pictured by contour lines and shadings, and this is what's happening on the right-hand one, on the same principle as mountains and valleys. The curves of nature are represented at a serious disadvantage by the mosaic work of types. So this is what I want you to take away from the Meteorographica and forward to the weather plates, as Galton did. The clear relationship that he wanted to create between weather phenomena and its visual presentation, but the crucial problem of making that material. And in particular, the kind of language that he was using to discuss this. Pieces of mosaic, stitches of tapestry, sweeps of a draftsman's pen, contour lines and shadings, the curves of nature. Let's go back to 1908 and the memories of my life, to the weather charts. I next tried the plan of cutting curves and arrows in soft material by a drill pantograph, whence casts might be taken for printing. A drill pantograph is made like an ordinary one, except that the pencil is replaced by a drill. This plan of the weather maps, so that's the pencil being replaced by the drill, was submitted to the Times, and I still have the first trial stereotype that was cast on this principle. So here we've reached the weather plate, and this is Galton's pantograph, which we found in the collection, with the drill that replaced the pencil. And I should maybe just explain that a pantograph is a machine where if you've got a pen, essentially you trace a drawing on one end and you put a pencil in the other, it allows you to copy an image exactly. So in this case, you can drill it exactly. Sorry, I've scribbled all over this over the course of the day. So this is the one from the Galton collection. And what he's done is he's invented his own machine to create a materially sensitive method of putting his weather on paper, sensitive both to the phenomena of weather and to the process of printing in the Times. I want to end with something that Galton actually wrote 20 years earlier, but which I think perfectly sums up the material way that he thought about his maps and that you can see in the weather plates. recreating essentially the curves of nature in the contours of a printing plate, and that comes back to this photo. He wrote, "The strictly accurate but meagre information that is afforded to the student of ordinary maps is more tantalising than satisfactory. A blind man fingering a model could learn as much from his sense of touch alone as they convey to our eyes. They are little more than an abstraction or a ghost of a vivid recollection." Galton's concern was precisely putting that model, that abstraction, onto a piece of paper. No? And I know I've run out of time, so I just very quickly want to say that there's been a lot of talk about remaking objects and using them. And I'm very lucky that Subhadra Das, who is the curator of the Galton collection, and Ling, and I've forgotten her surname, Chu, who works in the UCL Art Museum here, have anyway, in spite of me, or despite me, been working on a project to recreate these printing plates and to print them in paper. So they're essentially doing what I would have done anyway. So there we go. That's it.